Hello everyone. I wanted to do a little sit down video to share with you some tips that I had for anyone that's beginning embroidery. If you're a complete beginner or if you're just kind of starting this journey and you're looking for some tips, I wanted to share some. I did a video several years ago when I first started this channel that had some, and I figured I had a few more to share, and I am a little bit more comfortable in front of the camera now, so I just wanted to kind of redo this and just kind of wipe the slate clean, get started, starting fresh. So I'm trying out using my phone as a mic because my mic on my camera doesn't pick up sound very well if I'm just using that. I haven't figured out the microphone situation, so bear with me while I'm just using my phone as a mic for now. So this first tip is relatively simple, but that is to use natural fabrics. So when I first started learning embroidery, I would just kind of pick out whatever kind of fabric. I would use synthetic fabric, I would use t-shirt material, I tried everything. And it's really tricky to embroider on synthetic fabrics normally. They're just not as forgiving. They can be stretchy, which can kind of stretch underneath your stitches and wrinkle the fabric. They're just not great to work with at all. It's just kind of a headache. So I would recommend sticking with something like cotton or linen. Those are pretty much the two fabrics I generally always stick with, unless I'm stitching on something like wool felt or something. But for a project in a hoop, I always stick with cotton or linen for the most part. There's a bunch of shops online that you can purchase really nice fabric from, like hand-dyed fabrics. I'll leave a few links down below that you can check out some shops. And there's also things like Kona cotton that's pretty widely carried online and also in a lot of fabric stores. I really like Kona cotton because it comes in a really wide variety of colors, so it's fun if you're looking for something very particular. There's generally a ton of different shades of all the colors. The other thing is, if you feel like your fabric is kind of too thin, you can always double it up. So with Kona cotton, there is times when I will double up the fabric. My next tip would be to try to spend just a couple more dollars on embroidery materials. I know that things can kind of add up when you're first getting started, so I'm definitely not asking you to spend an arm and a leg on materials, but I do think that it helps to invest in some nicer embroidery hoops. And I'm talking a few more dollars, nothing crazy. I personally don't really recommend a lot of embroidery hoops you can buy at a craft store. A lot of the hoops are made of bamboo, and sometimes the bamboo rings don't completely seal well together, so they don't grip the fabric as well. And sometimes they also have wood ones, and the wood ones are just not made of very durable wood, so they break easily and they just don't work very well. So I would recommend something like beechwood embroidery hoops, and I have one right here. The hardware is really nice on the top. They are also, the actual wood is very nice. It's got kind of a nice finish to it. I don't think it's actually finished wood, but it's sanded down in a nice way. And the wood is a lot thicker, and it also seats together really nicely. So I would recommend getting something like that, and you can get that on Etsy. You can also get them on Amazon. If you just search for beechwood embroidery hoops, they'll pop up. But again, I can leave all of the links to a lot of the products I order down in the description, so you can check them out as well. The next product that I definitely would not skimp on, and I would not buy generic, is embroidery needles. So you can buy these on Amazon, but what happens is the material is normally cheap metals. It can also be coated sometimes, and they don't sand down the eye of the needle very well. So I've bought them before and realized that the inside of the needle had ridges in it, which just makes it a lot more difficult for you to thread a needle and to use. And a lot of them can tarnish easily. So it's just overall not a very good product, because you just don't really know what you're getting. So I would stick with something like a well-known brand for that. And all of these are very affordable. Nothing is crazy priced, but I would recommend something like DMC or John James needles. These are the two go-tos that I like to use. I prefer John James over DMC because I do think they're a little bit higher quality, but DMC is budget friendly and it's pretty widely available in most craft stores. So that is another option if you don't have access to the John James needles. So this next tip that I have is to try out a couple of different transfer methods and find one that you feel like works best for you. So I used to recommend certain transfer methods for people, but I've found that it's kind of personal. So I like to use stick and stitch sometimes for things, but I have heard from people that they don't really like it because it's very sticky and it can be hard to pull a needle and thread through. So I think it really depends on the project you're doing. I think that method is fine if you're using a little bit less thread, and I thread paint for most of my embroideries, so I'm only using like 1 or 2 strands. But if you're using a larger amount of thread, it can be harder to use. So that's just one example of, a transfer method that some people really like and others don't. But the main thing with the transfer method is just that it's going to be a way that you can adequately transfer the design you want. So if you find that tracing through fabric is really hard for you, like you can't see the lines very well and you end up with a design that's just kind of suboptimal and it doesn't quite match the design that you had drawn up, then I would recommend trying something else. So there's other methods like water-soluble super solvi, which is like a translucent stabilizer that you can draw on. There's also stick and stitch, like I had mentioned, and there is stuff like chalk transfer or carbon transfer. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can do it, but the main thing is just that it's going to be something that you can follow easily and something that you enjoy. So I would just try a couple of different ones out and see which ones you like best. So the next thing that I'd recommend if you are just starting out with embroidery and you're trying to learn the basic techniques is to choose a handful of stitches and just stick with those for a while. So I think just sticking with a few techniques and stitches will just prevent a lot of overwhelm that you'll experience, and it also will make it to where you really have the fundamentals down and you'll feel comfortable with your abilities before you move on to the next thing. So the really cool thing about embroidery is that you can literally use one stitch and create an embroidery out of it. You could use the satin stitch and that's it, or you could use the back stitch and that's it. So you could really technically stick with one stitch and you could make an entire project out of it. So I would just stick with as many as you feel like you're comfortable with learning, so you don't feel completely overwhelmed and you feel like you're gonna forget all of the steps for each stitch. I would just stick with maybe like 3 to start out with and then just kind of build on each project. A good way to do this too is to search for beginner-friendly patterns. A lot of them just have several basic stitches in them, and they'll normally be pretty straightforward with like how many stitches there are or if the pattern is ideal for beginners. So that's a good way. And then another way that you can learn some more embroidery stitches is by searching for like a embroidery stitch sampler. Those will have probably a variety of stitches that are a larger variety of stitches than, say, a beginner-friendly pattern that just has like 3 to 5 stitches in them. The samplers are more meant to teach you a larger variety of stitches, but if you are ready to take that step, it's a great way to do it too because you have a project to practice on instead of just learning the stitches on a piece of fabric with no sort of goal that you have in mind. It can get kind of boring. So I would recommend trying to, just seek out some sort of sampler pattern or some sort of beginner-friendly pattern. Okay, so this next thing is something that I didn't really learn until probably a few years ago, embarrassingly enough. I feel like it seems so obvious to me now, but I think that it is something that's overlooked. Using the correct size embroidery needle is so important. So I used to just pick up a needle, and if I could thread the floss through it, the amount I wanted, then I would just use it for the most part. But if you're using a needle that's not appropriately sized for the amount of thread you're using, or even the kind of fabric you're using, you can actually do damage to the fabric, or you can just create an embroidery that doesn't look as good as it could have if you would have just chosen the right size needle. Embroidery needles come between size 3 and 10. So 10 is the smallest and 3 is the largest. I think there might be a 1, but it's not very common. So those are generally the sizes you'll see on needle packets. So when you're using a size 10 needle, you would use 1 strand of thread. if you want to use all 6 strands, you would use a size 3. I will link below a needle size chart I made across different brands. This is like on average what you can use. They can vary a little bit by size, but for the most part, it's a good guideline to go off of if you're not quite sure which size to select for how many strands of thread you're using. But when you use the correct needle size, it just makes it so much easier to embroider. You'll feel the difference, and it will also make the embroidery look a lot cleaner. So if you're using too large of a needle, things like your thread can slip out of the needle really easily, or you'll have visible holes in the fabric in between your stitches. But if you're using the correct size needle, you can fit in a lot more really small details, and it's just generally, it looks a lot better. It's easier to blend colors together if you're thread painting. Once you start doing it, you'll be like, why didn't I do this? So try that out. That's just a very quick fix. If you feel like your embroidery doesn't quite look the way you want it to, if you feel like you can't quite control the stitches, it may be your needle. So this next tip is kind of old school, but I feel like it is very beneficial for learning, and that is to pick up a nice just encyclopedia of embroidery, some sort of embroidery book that you find that has a bunch of different techniques in it, a bunch of different stitches in it. I know the internet is an awesome place to learn. Obviously, like, I have this channel, there's a bunch of other creators on Instagram and YouTube that you can learn from, but I think to really dive into something, sometimes just having a book that has all of the different things laid out in it is so helpful. It's just nice to have something tangible that you can flip through and look around in, but it's also really helpful because you just don't really know what you don't know when you're learning something new. There's just so many different techniques and skills, and I just think it's really helpful and beneficial to kind of explore that and figure out what techniques you want to learn, and books are a great place to start. So the book that I really recommend people purchase is Royal School of Needlework's Book of Embroidery. That book is so comprehensive. That would be my number one choice, but I do have a couple of other embroidery books as well. I can link, I have another blog post that has a bunch of like beginner friendly book recommendations in it, so I will also link that because there's a bunch of other books you can check out too. This next thing is really helpful when you get really frustrated, and that is to take breaks. I know that's really obvious and it's a very like cliche thing to tell people that are learning, but I personally don't take enough breaks, and I have to remind myself that I need to just like step away some days from things when I get really frustrated, because sometimes just giving yourself space from something and allowing your mind to kind of rest and then come back to something with fresh eyes makes it so much easier to approach the problem. You'll have more patience. You might have a different perspective on it. So if you feel like you're getting really frustrated with a particular technique or just a project, maybe put it down for a few days. You could try something else for a few days, or just completely put it down, take a break, and then come back to it. And I guarantee you'll probably end up working through the problem. It just takes some time, and everybody goes through trials and errors and mistakes with learning new techniques. So it's totally normal, but that would be my number one piece of advice when you get super discouraged and frustrated, is to just kind of give yourself a break and be gentle with yourself. So the last piece of advice I wanted to share with you in this video is to find a technique that you feel works best for you. So there are so many different styles of embroidery out there, and I think that once you've kind of been working on learning embroidery and the basic techniques for a while, you'll probably naturally want to try a particular style of embroidery. So whether you want to do something a little bit more abstract, or you want to do something a little bit more modern, or maybe you want to try thread painting, I think that it's really important to try all of those things, and like never to just completely pigeonhole yourself into one style. But if you find a style that you really like, but it's not popular, and you're like, well, I should probably like this other thing, you should go with the thing you like and the thing that you think is most natural to you. And I am very passionate about this because for a long time, I wanted to make super modern, minimalist style embroideries, and it just like did not come naturally to me. And that is what is generally the most popular thing right now. obviously, because I feel like a lot of modern art things are very popular, but there's a lot of other styles of art that are popular too. So it's like, it was this weird like mind barrier or mind block that I had about it, where I just felt like I had to fit into this box that I just did not fit into artistically. I have always just leaned more towards more realism and like intricate like thread painting stuff, and that just came more naturally to me, but I always just kind of brushed it off being like, well, that's not what I want to do, like I'm just going to keep working on this other thing. Obviously, you should work on whatever you really want to work on, but if you find that something comes more naturally and it is something you enjoy, then I say you should just lean into it and keep going. So I guess like 3 or 4 years ago, I really started to get more serious with, like pet portraits and just thread painting in general. And I've made it a point to just kind of stick with that style for a while to try and find my artistic style more, if that makes sense. Thread painting, I don't think is like an artistic style, but it's a technique that you can use to achieve a certain kind of embroidery art. So I have just been leaning into that, and so far it's been going okay. So I feel like I'm kind of known for my thread painting stuff. People generally find my patterns and they want to learn how to thread paint, or they want to learn pet portraiture, and that's kind of what I've made a name for myself in. So I'm glad that I finally kind of let go of these like predetermined ideas in my head of like what I was supposed to do, and just kind of stuck with my natural strengths. So that is the last tip I have. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful, and please leave in the comments your favorite embroidery tip you want to share with everybody. If there's one that I didn't share, I'm sure there's a billion I didn't share. So these are just some of the newer ones that I had on my mind that I felt like would be helpful. So yeah, if you enjoyed this kind of content and you want to continue seeing videos for embroidery, then please like and subscribe. All right, I'll see you in the next one.